Lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien joins us this morning. Good morning, Jeff. Thanks for coming on this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
So, were you surprised at the Supreme Court ruling on Friday?
I wasn't. I think when we talked a week ago, I said, I pointed out that, this is a court that has been appointed unanimously by DFL governors, and I didn't see, I think that the GOP was fortunate to get the first ruling on the special election, but to get two within a week favorable wasn't going to happen. So it was disappointing, but not surprising.
Well, and it's disappointing specifically for the GOP relating to the amount of work that they had done for the past 2 weeks. It's going to cause further confusion because now we need to get the House working again. In order to do that, we need at least one DFL member to show up to give us that quorum. So it kind of continues to put the DFL in a tough spot with this catch-22. They want to continue to boycott, but if they continue to boycott, then you can't get the House in session, and you also can't get the special election for 40B scheduled to bring the House to a tie. So, what the Minnesota Supreme Court did beyond, and again, we can talk about sort of the long-term ramifications of this. If they've really just added to the chaos that's already been taking place at what was to be the start of the legislative session back on January 14th.
Yeah, I would say, John, to quote one of my former law school professors, what the Supreme Court did last week was interesting but irrelevant. We have separation of powers. And, if I understand right, the House Republicans were at the Supreme Court saying, stay out of it. It's a political question. It's not for you to decide. And the Supreme Court said, we're going to decide. So, and what I've been kind of following various folks on X over the weekend and talking with people, and I get the impression that for the GOP, the House GOP are going to just do what they're doing now. And it's, my gut is that this is not that in some of the districts that aren't the safe districts. In Minneapolis, the representatives in Minneapolis and St. Paul, I'm sure their constituents support this all day long. But there's a few of them that are not in the core cities, and I'm hearing that they're getting pushback. And I do think it might be just a matter of time before one of them, quote unquote, crosses the picket line and gets their butt in their seat. And there is 68 votes over there. So I think that the House GOP is just going to hold the line and say, you had no jurisdiction, you had no authority to enter into this fray, and we're just going to keep doing what we're doing.
So let's just, for the sake of argument, let's say that the GOP shows up today, no members of the DFL show up, and they do just as you said. They continue to move forward just like they have been the past 2 weeks, heading into week 3. What kind of challenge, is there a challenge that could be mounted to them doing that? We already had the Supreme Court rule on the issue of a quorum. Is there any challenge that could be brought forward beyond that relating to the GOP saying, hey, we appreciate your opinion, but you don't have any jurisdiction here?
Yeah, my prediction is, John, I think the next phase of the fight is going to be the attempt to send the state patrol out to these representatives' homes to go get them and bring them to St. Paul for session, and finding out, is the governor going to tell the state patrol, don't do it? So that's going to be this. I think that's going to be this week's fight, is trying to compel their attendance.
We had a talk back that rolled in earlier. I'm going to revisit this, but the idea of what the state Supreme Court has done, let's say that what they've done carries weight, and somebody shows up today from the DFL, gives 68 members they have a quorum, so the pushback on the Minnesota State Supreme Court is irrelevant, and we move forward. And again, I'm laying out the scenario here. And let's also say that we get to the special election, 40B goes in favor of the DFL, and there's an even split 67-67. There's been a lot of individuals that have been pointing to how much they would like the GOP to simply not show up sort of an in their face move to put on display, what has taken place here. To that point, and I'll get to these talkbacks after our conversation is over, Jeff O'Brien, what the Supreme Court ruled, if indeed it is taken with some sort of authority, has the potential to really screw up future legislative sessions, because anybody can just simply go and do that to deny them a quorum and keep the legislature from moving forward.
Yeah, and that's the long-term fallout, the long-term damage by the Supreme Court getting involved here. And this is what I think we talked about last week, is you would hope that they would see the forest for the trees on this and not just make a, nakedly partisan decision thinking about the calculus on this fight with the Minnesota House. And that's not what they did. I don't think they thought about the repercussions of making this statement, because I think that this is going to end up, this has the potential to open up further game playing over time when someone doesn't get their way at the House.
Do you think the Supreme Court was fully aware of what we talked about at the beginning of our conversation, lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien, and that is the GOP can basically say, hey, we appreciate your opinion, but we're moving forward, and they know that they don't have much else to say regarding that apart from their opinion, and therefore it kind of empowered them to side with the party that they politically align themselves with?
I don't know for certain, but it just seems to me that their sole calculation was, we need to recognize where our bread is buttered. We're siding with our people.
I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall for any of the discussions that may have taken place or emails that were exchanged between leadership and the Supreme Court, but I know that's not going to happen. Let's move over to a couple of other issues here, Jeff O'Brien. Lindsey Graham on Meet the Press over the weekend, he was asked about Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. He said, I think that there's a good chance that the Supreme Court will side with Trump on the issue of birthright citizenship. He said he introduced legislation to end birthright citizenship years ago. I know they're talking about this in Congress now. But, where do you think the Supreme Court could end up on this particular issue that's dominating the headlines?
Well, there is definitely scholarship on both sides. There is scholarship to suggest that the 14th Amendment doesn't extend this broadly to children of people here illegally. And so I think that's really what the motivation behind the executive order was, and to that extent, the president's already won on that, right? It wasn't like I don't think he harbored any illusion that he was going to end birthright citizenship with executive order. He knew he was going to get challenged in the court. So I think it's kind of a two-phase process. I think that first we're going to see what the Supremes say on this, and it's this whole this language subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And I was listening to some stuff over the weekend and some commentators and pointing out how much the 14th Amendment was based off of the 1866 Civil Rights Act, and the language they had in there was even clearer about it would seem to suggest that this was not what was intended by the amendment. But I think the second phase of this is if the Supremes don't curtail what's been happening here with illegal migrants giving birth here, I think we're setting the stage for a constitutional amendment to clarify or curtail that. And I mean, it's a winning issue for the GOP, so why wouldn't they?
Lastly, Jeff O'Brien, several key U.S. Senate Republicans yesterday defended Trump's decision to fire the independent government watchdogs, the inspectors general, at least 17 federal agencies, even though the move ran afoul of federal law. Now, inspectors general are independent watchdogs tasked with rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse, speaking of fraud. But what are your thoughts on Trump's move on these inspectors general?
Well, the law that's a question, John, is something that got passed in 2022. It's never been tested in the courts. Interestingly enough, it was passed after Biden broomed out all the Trump-era inspectors general. But I think there's two things. There is a provision in that law that allows the president to give notice within 30 days after the firings if there's just cause to do it. So we'll find out more about that. But also, and this is the same issue we're having here in Minnesota, it's the separation of powers issue. I think that this could be setting up for a Supreme Court decision on the constitutionality of this 2022 Act that has, the president having to report to Congress before he can fire executive branch, officials. So we'll see. Like I said, I think we're going to get a court challenge. I think we're going to find out that, whether or not this law that they're relying on that was passed, 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, whether it's even constitutional or not.
Lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien, thank you as always for your insight, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, John.